So, welcome to Jumbo IS and welcome to our lecture series called Daily News in Shorts. In this lecture series, we cover a particular day's newspaper, very short span of time within 20 minutes. Now, today we are going to be covering today's newspaper, that is September 2, 2024's newspaper. And the important news items or the important topics that are featuring in our today's lecture are as following. So, here are today's topics, and these topics were the ones that featured in today's newspaper and are important for our civil services examination. All right. So let's take a look at these topics one by one. Number one is Rule 170 of Drugs Act. Recently, a case against Patanjali Ayurvedic is going on in Supreme Court. And while listening to that case, Supreme Court has actually reprimanded Ayush Ministry for their July 1st notification. Now, what was their notification on 1st July? Why did Supreme Court reprimand Ayush Ministry? And what is Rule 170 of Drugs and Cosmetics Act? We'll talk about this issue. Then, recently, an article was published in Indian Express newspaper which called for de-hyphenating rice and wheat. Generally, while making agricultural policies, we club together rice and wheat. All right? But this article writer actually called for separating rice and wheat while making agricultural policies. Agricultural policy for rice should be separate and unrelated from agricultural policy of wheat. We need to de-hyphenate the two. And why is he arguing that? We'll talk about this issue. Then recently, there was this news item that called for, or not called for, that actually informed us that there has been a fall in crude oil imports, especially from Russia in the month of August. Okay. So our crude oil imports have fallen down for the month of August. Now, what are the reasons behind that? We'll talk about this. And recently, National Statistical Office, NSO's quarterly GDP estimate for India has come out. Okay. So what is quarterly GDP? April to June quarter of this year. This quarter's GDP figures have been outed by NSO. Now, what were the important highlights of these figures? We'll talk about this. Okay, so we'll confine our attention to these four topics. Let's start with topic number one, which is Rule 170 of Drugs Act. Now, Justices Hima Kohli and Sandeep Mehta, while hearing the ongoing Supreme Court case against Patanjali Ayurved, pulled up Ayush Ministry for its July 1st notification, asking state licensing authorities not to initiate or take any action under Rule 170 of Drugs and Cosmetics Act. So, while listening to the case against Patanjali Ayurved, Supreme Court actually asked Ayush Ministry or pulled up Ayush Ministry for their July 1st notification. Now, what was Ayush Ministry's July 1st notification? Ayush Ministry actually asked state licensing authorities to not to take action against any Ayurvedic company or Siddha company or Unani company, not to take any action as per Rule 170 of Drugs and Cosmetics Act. Okay. Now, the question is, what is Rule 170? And Supreme Court is against Ayush Ministry for this particular reason. Ayush Ministry says that no action should be taken against under Rule 170. Supreme Court says that why did you do that? Why shouldn't action be taken against these companies who are misusing Rule 170? Okay. Now, the question is, what is Rule 170? So this Rule 170 was introduced in 2018 under Drugs and Cosmetics Act, which regulates all the medicines in our country. Okay. And this rule was introduced to prevent misleading ads regarding Ayush products. In fact, the case against Patanjali Ayurved is also related to misleading ads, that Patanjali Ayurved used to advertise its products by giving misleading information. Okay. Now, Rule 170. So it was brought to specifically for controlling inappropriate advertisement of Ayurvedic, Siddha and Unani medicines. And all of these come under Ayush. A stands for Ayurveda, Y stands for Yoga, U stands for Unani, S stands for Siddha, and H stands for homeopathy, right? So this Rule 170 was brought so as to stop these companies who manufacture these drugs from publishing misleading advertisement. Basically, what this rule does is, this rule prohibits Ayush drug manufacturers from advertising their products without approval and allotment of unique identification number from state licensing authority. So, if an Ayush manufacturer wants to advertise their medicine, well, they have to first take approval from a state licensing authority. And after approval, they will get a unique identification number. Only then they can advertise. Now, while giving approval, state licensing authorities actually check for everything. They check whether their products have benefits. Do they have any disadvantages? Are their claims justified? All these things are checked, and then only unique identification number is given, and post that only the Ayush drug manufacturer can advertise. Now, this rule was introduced after a parliamentary standing committee highlighted the problem of misleading claims made by these medicine manufacturers. Okay. Now, Ayush drugs are already difficult to regulate. Why? Look, modern medicine, or we call them allopathic medicine. For allopathic medicine to get an approval, they have to conduct clinical trials. Okay. So if an allopathic medicine, let's suppose paracetamol or any antibiotic, it wants to get approved, then it has to conduct clinical trials. In those clinical trials, they have to prove that their medicine has little side effects and benefits. Okay. Now, these clinical trials are conducted as per the provisions of Drugs and Cosmetics Act. Only then they get approval. But as far as Ayush drugs are concerned, they can be approved simply based on rationale provided in the authoritative text of a particular stream. So, if Ayurvedic medicine manufacturers prove that in the ancient text of Ayurveda this medicine was mentioned, they don't have to conduct clinical trials. Okay. Now, this is a bit murky. Okay. Safety trials have to be conducted only for formulations that use around 60 specific ingredients. Government has said that if Ayush drug manufacturers can prove that their medicine is mentioned in the ancient text, they don't have to get any, they can be approved without clinical trials. They'll have to conduct safety trials only if their medicine contains these 60 ingredients. Now, what are these 60 ingredients? These 60 ingredients are mentioned in the Act. They include snake venom, examples like snake venom, snake head, heavy metals, and all that stuff. Only for these things they have to conduct safety trials. Otherwise, they just have to prove that their medicine has some mention in authoritative ancient texts. Okay. Now, what happened? The Ayurvedic, Siddha, and Unani Drugs Technical Advisory Board, they said that state licensing authorities need not prosecute companies under Rule 170. So, if there is any company who has made advertisements, okay, who has made advertisements without getting approval from state licensing authorities, they are violating Rule 170. Action should be taken against them. But ASUDTAB says that, or advises the state licensing authorities not to take action under Rule 170 because they say that these companies are already being prosecuted under Drugs and Magic Remedies Act. There is a separate act. Okay. But Supreme Court says that this advisory is not nice. They should be prosecuted under Rule 170 because people's safety is in question. If these companies are advertising and making false claims, then they should be punished. Okay, so that's the issue. All right. Now let's move on to our next news item, which is de-hyphenating rice and wheat. Look, what did this article writer say? Most economics commentators and policymakers tend to club wheat and rice, treating them as a part of cereal surplus or monocropping lack of diversification problem. So whenever we are talking about agriculture, most economists and agricultural experts, they club wheat and rice together. Okay. But the thing is, both rice and wheat are going through separate situations. This article writer says that there are different situations in terms of these two crops. In case of rice, there is a surplus problem. Despite record exports of rice, government godowns or government stocks for rice are overflowing. They are one of the highest in the recent history, right? So rice is facing a surplus problem and wheat is facing a deficit problem. There was decline in exports, plus government stocks of wheat are also in decline. So whereas rice is facing a surplus problem, wheat is facing a deficit problem. How can you treat them equally? How can one policy solve the problems facing rice and wheat? Wheat should have a separate policy and rice should have a separate policy, right? This is what the argument is. Okay. Now, what is the current situation? Look, the thing is, first of all, rice is facing a surplus problem, or rice is grown in surplus and wheat is grown in deficit. There are two reasons for that. First of all, rice is grown both during Kharif and Rabi seasons. Well, in North India, they are only grown during Kharif season, okay? But in South India, there are no winters, right? So they are also grown during Rabi season. So rice is grown, as far as India is concerned, all year round. So definitely there is going to be a surplus. Wheat, on the other hand, can only be grown during Rabi season. Plus, wheat is not grown in South India. Wheat is generally grown in 8 states that produce 2 metric ton plus. Okay, and these states are concentrated in North, West, and Central India. So wheat already has little geographic spread. Plus, wheat cannot be grown in Kharif season. All right. So this is reason number one. Why rice has surplus, wheat has deficit. The other reason is that as far as rice is concerned, the major limiting factor is water. Okay, so places that do not grow rice, they do not grow rice because there is lack of availability of water. But with the expansion of irrigation cover, these areas are also growing rice. So growth of rice is expanding. But as far as wheat is concerned, the limiting factor of wheat is that winters are getting warmer due to global warming. Okay, they are getting shorter, warmer, less predictable. In North India also. So wheat is facing a climate change problem. Rice is facing irrigation problem which is solvable, whereas wheat is facing climate change problem which is not that easy to solve. All right. So this is also the reason. So already wheat is facing supply problems. Plus wheat is also facing demand problems. That is why there is shortage of wheat. As far as supply of rice is concerned, it's quite high. Supply of wheat is concerned, it's quite low. But as far as demand for rice is concerned, it's not that high. But demand for wheat is rising, and it is rising more and more as the years pass on. India's wheat production is facing structural challenges. Okay, climate, geographical, because it is not grown all over India, and temporal, time related also. It is only grown in Rabi season. So wheat is facing supply related problems. It is only grown at one time of the year, during one time of the year, Rabi. It is not that geographically spread out as rice is concerned, plus climate change. So this is a problem. Supply of wheat is not that high, but its demand is growing. Wheat is being used in variety of processed foods also. We are not consuming wheat just for rotis, chapatis, and all that stuff. Wheat is being used in breads, cakes, biscuits, and other processed foods. Plus, as urbanization is rising, wheat consumption is also in the rise. So, wheat's consumption is rising. Supply is problematic. Production is problematic, right? That is why wheat is facing a deficit problem. All right. That is why wheat's policy should be different from. Make sense? So this is what the argument is. All right. Okay. Now let's move on to our third news item, which is fall in crude oil imports. India's crude oil imports from Russia, New Delhi's largest source market for oil, cooled off sequentially in August from July's near record levels as oil demands evidently softened in the run up to refinery maintenance season. Now, during July, crude oil imports were almost close to record numbers. But in the month of August, crude oil imports declined. Now, there is a reason for that. Look, the thing is, what does India do? India basically does not have crude oil. So, India imports crude oil from different countries. Okay. Then India processes these crude oils or this crude oil in its refineries. Okay. And after refining this crude oil, petrol, diesel, kerosene, and other products are created, right? And then India uses these products for domestic consumption or exports them. Okay, so major demand for crude oil in India is coming from refineries because India has refining capacity. You cannot use crude oil without refining it. India does not have crude oil, but India has refineries. So India imports crude oil, refines it, creates products, and then exports them. The thing is that during the month of September, India's refineries go for maintenance and upgradation. So that is why refineries are closed during the month of September. Right? And that is why crude oil imports for the month of August declined. Why? Because these refineries are undergoing upgradation, undergoing maintenance, so they don't need crude oil because they won't be able to refine it because they are undergoing maintenance. Right? So now, refinery maintenance season, as far as refinery maintenance season is concerned, the peak maintenance season is in the month of September and it recovers again in October. So, refineries take just 1 month to repair themselves. Once they're repaired, they come to full capacity in October and demand for crude oil increases once again. All right, this was the only news. I included this news. Why? Because I wanted to inform you that there is this thing called refinery maintenance season in India and it is generally in the month of September. All right. By the way, some other information that you need to be familiar with is that who are India's top crude oil suppliers. So, as far as August and July are concerned, well, Russia is India's top supplier in the recent times. Then is Iraq, and then is Saudi Arabia. All right. So earlier it used to be Iraq and Saudi Arabia. Russia was at third or fourth place, right? But after Russia-Ukraine war, Russia started giving crude oil at discounted price, and India started buying that oil, and that is why Russia became India's top crude oil supplier. Make sense? Okay. And the last topic of the day, NSO's quarterly GDP estimates. Now look, there is this organization called National Statistical Office, NSO, and it releases GDP figures, okay, in India. Now these GDP figures are released annually. They are also released quarterly. Okay, now each year, 1 year is divided into 4 quarters. 1 quarter is 3 months. So there is April, June quarter, then there is July, September quarter, then there is October, December quarter, and next year's January, March quarter. All right. So NSO actually releases annual GDP figures and it releases GDP figures for each quarter. Now, April, because financial year, normal year starts on 1st January, but financial year starts on 1st April and goes on till 31st of March next year. Right? So April-June quarter is known as the first quarter. Right? So this financial year's first quarter GDP figures are out, and Indian economy grew at a 5-quarter low of 6.7% in the first quarter of the ongoing financial year. Okay, growth has come in lower than central bank RBI's expectations. RBI expected 7.1% of growth, but it has grown by 6.7%. Now there are various reasons for lower than expected growth. Okay, and plus optimists are saying that this growth is going to bounce back. Don't be disheartened that India's growth has slowed down. Yes, it is lower than expected, but it is going to bounce back. Now, what were the reasons behind this low growth? First, government spending was quite low. Government did not spend much during the April-June quarter on infrastructure project. Government's capital spending was low. And there is reason for that because government was busy in elections. So it had to lower down its expenditure. So this was one reason. Then agricultural sector grew slowly because of the heat wave. Heat wave's impact actually slowed down agricultural growth. And some services sector like hotels, trade, transport and communication, they also showed sluggish growth. All right. So it is because of these three reasons that India's growth figures for first quarter of financial year 2024-25 were lower than expected. Now, another thing that you need to be familiar with is what is NSO? Because questions might be asked. So NSO acts as a nodal agency for Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation. So remember, NSO comes under Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation. Now, NSO was formed in 2019 by merging CSO and NSSO. Okay. Now, Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation has two wings. One is known as the Statistics Wing, which is known as National Statistical Office, NSO. So, NSO is the Statistics Wing. NSO contains CSO and NSSO because after merging these two, only NSO was formed. Plus, it also contains a computer center. The second wing is Program Implementation Wing, which has 20-point program, infrastructure monitoring and project monitoring, MP-LAD scheme, MP fund scheme. Okay. So, these are the two wings of Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation. Remember, statistical wing is called NSO. So NSO contains both CSO and Sample Survey Organization, NSSO. All right. And with that, we conclude today's session. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. And I'm sure it added value to your preparation, though it would add more value if you are consistent and regular with this lecture series. So on the hope that you are going to be consistent and regular, I'll be signing off and I'll see you next time with next day's current affairs. Thank you.